fresh comments coming in from Donald Trump, in which he had mentioned that India has offered to cut their tariff to nothing. This is first time that US President is making such comments on social media platform. In fact, he has mentioned that India's tariff cut offer, it's getting late. What few people understand is that we do very little business with India, but they do a tremendous amount of business with us, unquote. In other words, he has mentioned that they sell us massive amounts of goods, their biggest client, but we sell them very little until now, a totally one-sided relationship. To understand what does these comments mean, and first time US President Donald Trump has mentioned that India has offered nil tariffs. So let's go across to my colleague Sumita Karir to put this story into perspective. Sumita?
Absolutely, Ankur. So that's a big breaking update that we're getting for our viewers. Donald Trump once again attacking India, and he's stating that India has decided to cut its tariffs to zero. This is not the first time that the US president has mentioned that India has decided to cut its tariffs down to zero, which is not essentially true, given the fact that negotiations were going on, and India did put its foot down on not crossing certain red lines with respect to agri, dairy and GM crops. And we did also see that perhaps talks between both the sides stopped for a while, negotiations stopped for a while. However, government sources have indicated that India and the United States, they remain engaged on different levels, different diplomatic levels as well. There are consultations going on. However, negotiations came to a halt. These talks were scheduled between the United States and India on August 25th. Those could not happen because of disagreements as far as the tariff policy of Donald Trump's administration is concerned, essentially related to US wanting more market access, and India was not ready to give market access with respect to the agri, dairy and GM crops sector. But once again, Donald Trump stating that India has decided to cut its tariffs to zero, which is further from a truth. In fact, we are awaiting an official statement from the government of India as well on what they have to say with respect to Donald Trump's latest tirade against India. And it's not just Ankur, it's not just Donald Trump, but if you've seen the Twitter handles of several of his leaders from his administration, including Peter Navarro, who just a couple of hours back, threw a casteist reference at India, and he stated that India is not agreeing and India is leading to that war between Russia and Ukraine progressing, which is essentially not a fact. It is not the truth. But officials from the Donald Trump administration are making statements which are not based in fact. In fact, let me take you through what Donald Trump has said in his tweet that's been posted on Truth Social. He says that it's been a totally one-sided disaster. Also, India buys most of its oil and military products from Russia and very little from the United States. Remember, once again, these attacks coming in from the US administration, from Donald Trump on India's energy trade with Russia. India has over and over again mentioned that its strategic autonomy will not be compromised upon, and that's something that we saw at the SCO summit as well, wherein as part of the declaration, all the countries mentioned at least that bilateral relations cannot be impacted by any third partners. Any third party is essentially what President Xi Jinping mentioned during his meeting with Prime Minister Modi that happened yesterday. In fact, today the Prime Minister also met with Vladimir Putin, and as part of the joint communique, let me read out a bit from that. That joint communique did mention about unilateral trading system. It said, and I quote, member states support the further improvement and reform of economic governance. The communique also stated that members uphold and strengthen an open, transparent, fair, inclusive, non-discriminatory and multilateral trading system that's essentially universally recognized principles and rules, and it promotes the development of open global economy and ensures fair market access and provides special and differential treatment for developing countries. So definitely it seems like Donald Trump is perhaps rattled at the coming together of RIC bloc, that is Russia, India and China, at the SCO summit. And we did show our viewers some pictures that were coming in from there. In fact, those are some of the pictures that are coming in from the SCO summit. We did also see that the Prime Minister spent about 40 minutes in a car on his way for a bilateral meeting with President Putin as well, and of course the meeting with President Xi also that went very well. So it just seems a case of Donald Trump getting
definitely right. Can we say that action and reaction? You saw the visuals where Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Putin were there inside the car. After that, bilateral talks happened, and now Donald Trump is claiming, and I underline the word claiming, that India has offered a nil, nothing kind of tariffs to US. No official confirmation from Indian side, but Donald Trump is saying on his social account, Truth Social, that India has offered nothing. So, Sumita, it is more of an action-reaction kind of a thing. It is more of a diplomatic pressure which US is trying to put.
Absolutely, Ankur, and this is not the first time that Donald Trump has been trying to amp up pressure on India or any of its other trading partners as well. There are some trading partners, for instance, Japan, the European Union, and several others in Southeast Asia itself, which have yielded to Donald Trump's pressures. However, there are certain other countries, including Brazil, Russia, India, and China as well, which have categorically criticized Donald Trump's policies, particularly with respect to the rollout of tariffs and how these tariffs have been one-sided, they have been unilateral. And of course, India has called out the Donald Trump administration just a couple of weeks back that these policies of the Donald Trump administration are unilateral and they are unfair. This is something that India has maintained. There have been attacks from many officials from his administration, including Peter Navarro, including Jameson Greer as well, who is the USTR as well, on India's energy trade with Russia. And India has so far maintained that India's energy security needs India will take a decision on its energy security needs, not on the basis of what some other country or the leader of some other country decides, but that is going to be solely based on its autonomy and its domestic needs, and of course will follow free market dynamics. Essentially, wherever it finds oil cheaper is where the Indian government is going to look at for meeting its purchase needs. So these kind of comments have come in from executives of the Donald Trump administration very many times earlier. So this is nothing new. Earlier on as well, about 2-3 weeks back, also Donald Trump claimed that a deal with India is almost done. They have agreed to cut down their tariffs to zero. They've completely allowed us access. However, that was not the case. India stood its ground. India made sure that our red lines were not crossed, and the Prime Minister has also stated very many times in the past, in the recent past few weeks itself, that the interests of farmers, the interests of fishermen and the domestic industry will not be compromised upon, and India has held its ground. We've also gotten calls from the Brazilian president as well, and we've gotten calls from other leaders as well. China has stood in our support as well when it comes to unilateral trading system, and that's essentially one of the points that President Xi Jinping brought about during his bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister just a couple of hours back. Yesterday is when both the sides met, and of course this is now essentially a strengthening of the RIC bloc or the strengthening of the SCO, and of course Donald Trump perhaps is reacting to that, or maybe he's trying to just put some additional pressure on India so that we bow down, so that we agree to what the Trump administration needs. But sources tell us that the government strategy is going to be protecting its own national interests. We're not going to be bowing down. We will maintain certain red lines. We will maintain national interest, and we will protect our industry, our national interests wherever there is a need to. On the other hand, the government of India is essentially looking at diversifying its exports to other geographies and sort of deviating from a reliance on the United States. In fact, in that light as well, the Prime Minister of India also traveled to Japan and did sign that deal as well with the Japanese Prime Minister as well. We are also exploring similar deals with Australia. Government sources are suggesting that the second tranche of Australia CECA might get completed soon. We are also in talks with other countries, very many countries, for instance, Oman. There is Saudi Arabia as well, with which a bilateral investment treaty is currently being negotiated upon. So we are looking at diversifying our exports. We're looking at building domestic demand, boosting domestic consumption.
This is nothing but a pressure tactic which is put in by Donald Trump, and he has done it again and again, and once again he's trying his hand. But at ET now, we stick to facts. The fact is that Indian government has not come out with any statement. The fact is that we are still standing out with a strategy that we will protect our interest. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi just a while back made a statement at SCO. Let's listen into that bite once again.
कठिन से कठिन परिस्थितियों में भी भारत और रूस हमेशा कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर चले हैं। हमारा करीबी सहयोग न केवल दोनों देशों के लोगों के लिए बल्कि वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि के लिए महत्वपूर्ण है। एक्सेलेंसी, यूक्रेन में चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय में हम लगातार चर्चा करते रहे हैं। हाल में किए गए शांति के सभी प्रयासों का हम स्वागत करते हैं। हम आशा करते हैं कि सभी पक्ष कंस्ट्रक्टिवली आगे बढ़ेंगे।
So, Prime Minister Narendra Modi making very clear what are the intentions of India, and this conversation happened during bilateral summit, bilateral talks with Russia. Sumita, we were discussing about putting pressure on India, but that strategy has not worked till now. We are looking for our own avenues where we can expand our exports. We are chalking out strategies. In fact, we are taking a lesson of what has happened so that in futures we are well diversified. Take us through the strategies which India is adopting in the light of what has happened from American side, and ever since that deadline has been crossed, India is actually making all efforts so that even exporters get some kind of benefit, and our long-term strategy is prepared.
Absolutely. So as far as India's domestic strategy is concerned, or India's strategy to deal with Donald Trump's tariff tirade is concerned, you remember the first deadline that was mentioned by Donald Trump was July 29th. We were given to understand that there would be a mini deal. However, the mini deal did not come about, and sources told us that this is essentially because of the fact that India maintained a solid ground as far as agri, dairy and GM crops. These three sectors are concerned. We're not going to be compromising on our interests just because Donald Trump is pressurizing us to, right? And this is essentially what has also been echoed by Brazil, by Russia, by China as well. Now, if you look at what the Chinese deal is, I'm going to come back to this point about India's domestic strategy, but China essentially at one point in time was engaged in a trade war with the Donald Trump administration, and of course Donald